Hey guys, I'm Davey, creator of the gay erotic website Himeros.tv, and today I am joined by sex and intimacy coach Finn Deerhart, intimacy coordinator LeoRising Scott, and social psychologist and researcher Dr. Justin Lehmiller. And today we are talking about gay sex and in particular cuckolding. So let's get started. Himeros Live is supported by Himeros.tv. Himeros.tv is a different kind of porn site. Our videos are developed by gay sex experts, created by award-winning filmmakers, and feature gorgeous models who are valued and supported with fair pay, on-set coaching, and free mental health support. Himeros.tv is gay porn evolved. Himeros Live listeners are invited to save 20% off their memberships by visiting himeros.tv/pod. That's himeros.tv/pod, and memberships are as little as $12 per month. Join the Himeros.tv family today at himeros.tv/pod. Himeros.tv, it's like porn, but better. Welcome, everyone.
Hey.
So good to see you all. Welcome, Dr. Justin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
You got that smooth podcast voice.
Well, I've been told, but hey, I like it.
Yeah, it hits the right places. I'm also intimidated because now we had Dr. Holly Richmond a few weeks ago, and all the sex experts that we've chatted with are so attractive, like so beautiful.
Well, that's quite a compliment coming from you, so I'll take it. Thank you.
From our sample size of 2 sex experts, we're at 100%, and that feels statistically significant. Cool. Well, Dr. Justin, I want to read a little bit about your bio that we have here. Let's see. Dr. Justin Lehmiller is a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute. He runs the Sex and Psychology blog and podcast and is author of the popular book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help Improve Your Sex Life. Dr. Lehmiller is an award-winning educator, having been honored 3 times with the Certificate of Teaching Excellence from Harvard University, where he taught for several years. So those are just a few of the reasons why we're excited to talk about you today. And I want to thank Finn for the introduction, for facilitating this, for making it happen. And when you say the Kinsey Institute, are we talking about like the Kinsey Institute, as in like the Kinsey Reports, Alfred Kinsey?
Yes. So I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. The Kinsey Institute is in Bloomington, which is about an hour south of me. And that is where Alfred Kinsey did his pioneering studies of human sexuality in the 1940s and 50s. And the Institute is just about to celebrate its 75th anniversary.
Oh my God, that's so exciting. Just to back up, you were born in Ohio, is that correct? You grew up in Ohio?
Yes, I'm from Canton, Ohio originally.
Okay, and your first psychology degree was from a Catholic university?
Yeah, so I kind of grew up going to Catholic schools, and then I went to a Catholic college for my undergraduate work in Erie, Pennsylvania, of all places. And then I got my master's degree at Villanova University, which was another Catholic school. And so I didn't get a lot of sex ed growing up. And it really wasn't until I was working on my PhD at Purdue University where I got to be a teaching assistant for a human sexuality course. And that's where my eyes totally opened to this world of sex research and education.
But so, I also went to Catholic school, Catholic college. I went to Seton Hall, New Jersey. But I guess where I'm going with this is how does a Midwestern boy who went to Catholic school end up studying sex at the Kinsey Institute? What was the thing in there that I'm missing?
Well, it was never on my radar. It's not like I grew up thinking I want to be a sex researcher or educator or anything like that. And I knew I wanted to be a psychologist, and I specifically went to graduate school to study the psychology of relationships. And it really wasn't until I was assigned to be a teaching assistant for that human sexuality course where I was like, oh, wait, why am I studying relationships, but nobody's talking about sex? It's kind of this weird thing. Mm-hmm. And that's what really stood out to me and made me kind of want to go down the route of sex research instead. I certainly still study relationships because all sex happens in some relationship context, whether it's casual or committed, or anonymous, they're all relationships of some sort. But that's really the thing that like sparked my interest in it. And I realized that there were so many questions that had never been asked before. There was so much I didn't know. My students were asking me all kinds of questions I didn't know the answers to. And so I wanted to try and help fill the void there.
Yeah. Well, Finn and LeoRising, feel free to jump in if you guys have questions. I'm just curious, like as someone who's researching sex, how do you get honest answers from people? Because I feel like that people are just going to be really guarded and maybe tell you what they want you to hear rather than what they're actually doing.
Sure. And here's the thing, people have a hard time talking about sex with their partners.
Totally.
We are in this weird place where we find it easier to have sex than to talk about sex with the people that we're having sex with. It's this really weird state of affairs. But when it comes to, say, an anonymous online survey, that's where people actually really open up. And, I thought when I conducted the research for my book, Tell Me What You Want, where I surveyed more than 4,000 Americans from all 50 states about their favorite fantasy of all time and hundreds of things that they might have fantasized about before, I was a little concerned going in. People might not tell me about what was going on in their fantasy worlds, but people really took that as an opportunity to open up. People want to talk about their fantasies. They just don't often have the opportunity to do it in a way that feels safe to them.
I'm curious about like what people, it's like if those are the people that are writing in, I think I talked to you about this a little bit before, but like if those are what are they not sharing if they're sharing what they are already? Because I'm always like, there's always more to pull on the rope, So
sure. And some people were more guarded. It's really interesting as somebody who studies fantasies to see how much people are willing to say. I have some people, when I ask them, what's your favorite fantasy of all time? You can say as much as you want. And they literally just write one word, right? Like their fantasy is sex or pleasure or something like that. And, I don't know exactly how to interpret that because it could mean maybe they're not comfortable sharing, but it could also mean that they don't have a very elaborate fantasy world or they haven't really figured out what works for them yet. But at the same time, I have other people who are literally writing pages, and their fantasies are very elaborate, very detailed. So it's interesting to me to see that diversity and variability and to try and understand it.
I find for myself as a medium and as a coordinator, when a question like that is asked to a client or to talent, even they are petrified to answer given the rapport. It's like the space is set up for the truth to be accepted, but when it pertains to sex, if we're not, in some cases I've observed and I've experienced, if we're not offering that information to someone that we're having that fantasy about, it doesn't feel the most comfortable to exchange it. And then if you do exchange it, there's this immediate equipping of, does this mean we have to fuck? Do I have to have sex with you? Does the intimacy of you knowing this thing about me have to go down the path of us now performing the thing? And the answer is no, it does not have to. And somebody else's career title might do that. Like there's some beautiful people to do that with, sacred intimates, right? But I really appreciate your presence here today. I feel like it's such a treat, Finn. I like this is amazing. Yeah. He's amazing.
Yeah, he is. It's cool.
It's nice to meet you too. I just wanted to add one thing to what you said, because it also applies in the context of an intimate, committed relationship. People feel that same sense of fear when it comes to sharing their fantasy with a partner. Like, if I say this, how are they going to interpret it? And if your partner shares the fantasy with you, does that mean that they necessarily want to do it?
Totally.
And so that's why I think it's really important to distinguish between fantasy and desire. And I would define a fantasy as this arousing mental thought or picture. It's something that pops into your head that turns you on, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something you want to do in real life. So a sexual desire is a want. It's something that you plan or hope to do in the future. And so I think when people are having these discussions about fantasies, it's really important to clarify, is this a fantasy or is this also a desire?
Spot on.
I find like it's so interesting. I talk about fantasies a lot with my clients, and I love talking about fantasy because I experience the same thing with my partner too. A lot of discomfort sharing about stuff, but I put myself in situations where I like do it again and again and again to try. But it's like our fantasies carry so much information that's like not like our socialized, civilized self, and so there's like a strong like conditioning within us that's it's almost like we can't really control it. It's like you shouldn't tell that. That is not something. It just really defies everything we've ever been taught to present to the world, and lots of practicing. Of like, this is who I am, and even with someone we love, it's like it can feel like there's a lot on the line here, and it's just like, oh wow, if I just push through this, it can be really fun. I mean, I've done, just time with my partner where we just jack off and just talk about fantasies, and once you get through the discomfort of it, it can be really, really fun, and just kind of push myself to go further and further. But
yeah, and what you're saying reflects what I see in my data, which is that there are a lot of transgressive elements in our fantasies, and our fantasies are often not politically correct, right? And so that adds another layer of reluctance to sharing them with our partners because we're really worried about being judged or shamed. And so that leads a lot of people to hold back. And a big part of the reason I wrote my book was because people just don't know what a normal sexual fantasy is. People have this tendency to think they're the only one who has it or that there's something weird or unusual about them. Mm-hmm. And so we need to normalize sexual fantasies to get people to that point where they feel comfortable sharing them with a partner.
So these 4,175 Americans that you surveyed, what is it that they want? What did they tell you?
They want a lot of different things. So I looked at all of these fantasies that were submitted. And when I looked at people's favorite fantasy of all time, I did a content analysis and broke it down into 7 main themes. So, the biggest themes were first multi-partner sex. So threesomes, foursomes, or moresomes. Next was power control and rough sex, anything related to BDSM, basically. Then there were the novelty and adventure fantasies, which are just trying something that's new and different for you. Often it's, having sex in a different setting or different position. So public sex was actually one of the most common fantasies in that category. Then there's the passion and romance fantasies, which have the more intimate and emotional elements. Then there are the non-monogamy fantasies where people, it's not that they want to have sex with multiple people at the same time in the same bed, but they want the ability to have more than one sexual or romantic partner simultaneously. Then there's the taboo fantasies where you're just like breaking all the rules and doing the things that you've been told you're not supposed to do. And then lastly, were the what I call gender bending and homoeroticism fantasies, where people are sort of pushing the boundaries of their gender identity or sexual orientation in some way, such as a cisgender person who cross-dresses or a heterosexually identified person who has a same-sex fantasy. So those were really the main themes that came out.
Were there any like big surprises?
Well, I should say, as a sex researcher, it's kind of hard to surprise me because I've kind of heard it all by this point. So, there was one new fantasy that I learned about in the course of this work that I thought was super interesting. And this was a 20-something woman who described her favorite fantasy as being a human cow. And basically her fantasy involved her being tied up in the center of town, being force-fed hormones so that she would lactate continuously, and then people could come and have sex with her and milk her whenever they wanted. So it's sort of a forced sex, interspecies kind of type fantasy with erotic lactation. And that was super fascinating to me because I'd never heard it before. And so then I did some digging and found...
I'm not the only one.
Yeah, she's not the only one. There were actually hundreds of porn videos I found and erotic novels written about this subject. So I'm like, wow, okay, I learned a new interest.
Wow. This brings a whole new meaning to Doja Cat's Bitch I'm a Cow song.
that was a theme for our shoot in Missouri.
Yeah. Do you know what I loved about some of your research actually was this finding, and it confirms a lot of bias I already hold, but so maybe that's part of why I like it. But the conservative people, or people who identify as Republican or even religious, fantasizing more about things on the spectrum of transgression than not, which I think, to me, it makes total sense. I'm like, well, there's the balancing act, but I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I wrote up those findings in the book, but then I did this more in-depth article I wrote for Politico about Republicans and Democrats and their sexual fantasies. And the biggest differences were that Republicans had more taboo themes overall, more fantasies about non-monogamy and group sex.
I
and,
love this data.
doing the things they're not supposed to do. And if you look at the Democrats, one of the things they fantasized about more was BDSM. So there were more power play fantasies on the left side of the spectrum. And I think ultimately it's kind of the same thing that's appealing to everyone across the political spectrum, where you want to do what you're told you're not supposed to do. And so for Republicans, like, you're supposed to be monogamous and be with one partner forever, and, sex for procreation and all these things. So that makes, all the non-monogamy group sex, all that other kind of stuff more appealing. Whereas for Democrats, they espouse this idea of a level playing field. Everybody's equal. And so I think playing with power becomes more taboo in that context. And so I think, it's ultimately the taboo element that's appealing to everyone. It's just expressed in different ways, because what's taboo varies depending on your identities and cultural context and where you are.
You're mentioning, Republicans and Democrats. I'm thinking these 4,175 people, like, how do you make sure that you're getting a representative sample? I guess this is a question about like the methodology of it, because like if I ask my closest friends are all perverts. So like if I ask my friends, like, it's not necessarily gonna, I mean, everyone's, I'm sure, a freak behind closed doors, but like, you might get different results from moms and dads in Ohio. How did you make sure that you were like reaching grandmas and like everybody?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, if you want to study sexual fantasies, there's like literally no funding to be able to do that. Like, I can't apply for a grant to get money to study people's sexual fantasies.
So crazy.
Yeah, I mean, in the US, if you want to study sex, there's pretty much only money if you're studying STDs or teen pregnancy prevention or something else related to sexual health. And, certainly all of that is important. But if you want to study the positive side of sex or pleasure or fantasy, there's just no money for these things, which is part of the reason why a lot of sex researchers have fled to Canada and other countries where there is more funding available to study diverse sexuality topics. So for my work, I had to make do with my own limited resources. And so I spent about 2 years collecting the data, and I made sure that I had people from all 50 states. I promoted it in a lot of different ways. I got people ranging in age from 18 to 87. They had diverse political backgrounds, religious backgrounds, so I continued data collection until I felt like I had a sufficiently diverse sample. I wouldn't say it's representative of the population, because it's really hard to get a representative sample if you don't have funding. But like I said, I did the best I could with my resources.
Thank you for doing that, especially for putting yourself out there. And it's independent. I don't love the term guerrilla, but independent, like unicorn marketing, is very important.
I'm a unicorn researcher.
Unicorn. It's like, follow me to the ocean and give me your data.
Yeah. And, this is a thing, like, for a lot of sex researchers, is they have that struggle with, do I study the things that I can get funding for, right? Even though that might not be what I'm passionate about and what I really want to do. Or do I follow, my interest and really where I want to go and answer the big important questions that no one's going to fund. And so I've kind of always been more on the other side of the spectrum. Like, I want to go where no one's gone before.
What would like a massive study or ballpark, what would the funding be for something like that? I have no way to even know.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to do a nationally representative US sample of a few thousand people, it's going to be tens of thousands of dollars to do something like that. And you're going to be limited on the number of questions that you can ask. So on my survey, there were 369 questions. That 69 wasn't intentional, just kind of, worked out that way. But if you wanted to do a national survey of 4,000 people with 369 questions, like, that would be a really expensive survey to do. If you were 30 questions and 1,000 people, maybe you could do that for 10 grand or something like that. But to do it on the scale that I did would be extraordinarily expensive.
I'm going to be the token witch really quick. 369, the spiritual number, via quick Google mancy, is communication, society, information, and relationships.
I don't know how I ended up there. So something spoke to me, apparently.
Clearly.
And the spirit moved you.
It's crazy that there isn't more research funding because like sex is such a big, I mean, it's like the thing that probably a lot of people think about a good portion of the day. Like it occupies a lot of the space in our heads. It motivates a lot of the decisions we make. I'm curious though, if in your research you found anything about how Americans communicate or don't communicate those desires. Like, okay, they have them. Like, how do they share them or do they not? Like, was there any information on that?
Yeah, so I found that about half of my participants said that they had shared their favorite fantasy of all time with a partner before, but only about 1 in 5 had ever acted on that fantasy in real life. And it's interesting because 80% of them said that their favorite fantasy is a desire. It's something that they want to do, but only 1 in 5 have done it. So there's a really big gap between what we want to do and then what we're actually doing in bed or wherever it is you're having sex.
Yeah, well, sometimes sometimes it is more kind of fun as a unfulfilled desire than actually doing it. Like even if it is something that's like safe and consensual and achievable, like I had a fantasy of a desire of swimming in a pool of lube. And several years ago, I reached out to Wet Lube, and they're like, "Yeah, we'll do it." And so it was like $60,000 or $70,000 of wet platinum. They put it in a pool inside their factory, and I made a YouTube video where I like swam in it, and I like got in, and it was this like cold, slippery, like the water was, or the lube was like probably like 60 degrees, like in the cold factory. And like all their marketing team is like lined up in like business suits, and I'm like getting into this lube pool, which is supposed to be this like really sensual design. And I was like, oh, this like, and I kept kind of like, they gave me a mask and a snorkel, and I kept kind of like, I couldn't get footing in the pool because it was so slippery. And I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna like fall back and drown. And they're gonna be like reaching in to try to get me out, and I'm just gonna be like slipping through their hands because I'm so lubed up. And I was like, okay, this one probably could have like stayed in my head.
No. Oh my God. So in shamanic dream work, right? If you we want to offer ourselves the reward of bringing our desires and our fantasies into the textual world, if possible. Finding a way to swim in lube totally helped you slip past, pun intended, many other obstacles in your life because you something came to you at a deep spiritual and like cellular level. You're like, I need to really eat this desire, metabolize it, and have that experience. And there's a butterfly effect that's quantum, and it's yours and yours alone. Like, who knows what opened? Only you know what opened up in your life. Like 3 hours to 3 weeks later after that. Like, that's phenomenal.
It just wasn't what I like. In the fantasy, I'm like, touching myself, all lubed up, like how sensual it's gonna feel. And in reality, I was like, this is cold and slippery and gross. And I kept finding like lube in between my toes, like weeks later.
Did they like use that lube in bottles like later? I mean, people like fucking with this lube. Yeah. They did a disclaimer on this.
yeah. Maybe they charged extra for those bottles. This is like the special brew. I think they said they got rid of it.
Are they biodegradable? That company? Like, where did that lube go?
I don't know. It's like circulating somewhere.
Did you touch yourself anywhere on your body that was pleasurable while you're in this vat of lube?
Good question.
Like your butt or your dick?
Yeah.
Or something?
No, I don't think so, because there were so many people. I might have touched my nipples a little bit. Like, ooh, what does this feel like? But I think lube is so cheap to make. I mean, it was maybe it was like $68,000 worth of lube. There was like a precise amount that they gave me. They're like, this is how much this would retail for.
Sounds like a year of college of lube.
Yeah. We're on a little bit of a conversational detour here, but it was like, how much did it actually cost to make $68,000 worth of lube? Probably like $50. It's like water with like glycerin or something. Like, I don't know how they make it. Anyway. All right. Enough about me. So you also research cuckolding in a collaboration. Was it with Dan Savage?
With Dan Savage and sex therapist David Lay.
Okay, which of course we're going to talk about because it's relevant for today's video. I do want to do a little intro and summary for the video. It's called Cuckold Me Love, and this is a Finn Deerhart original, directed and edited by Ed. We filmed this in Sweden. The models are Bishop Black, Caden Gray, JP Duwat, and also JP's nipples, which deserve their own credit. So the video opens with this really beautiful conversation with Caden talking to Bishop and JP. JP are a couple, at least in the video, and they're inviting Caden into this cuckolding experience. And we kind of go through a few things, and they set up the scene a little bit. Caden asks them if there's anything that they have doubts about or qualms or concerns, and then they dive into the sex. And in the sex, JP is blindfolded while Caden fucks JP's partner, who's Bishop. And since cuckolding is something that you've studied, Dr. Justin, I'm sure you've at some point had to kind of define what it is. And I think there was some confusion for our audience of like, well, what is this? Like, how is this different from, say, a threesome? So what is cuckolding?
Sure. So with any sex act, there's always some variability. Different people are going to have different definitions, and that's okay. But the way we typically define cuckolding is where one partner is watching or listening while their partner has sex with somebody else. And it's usually not a threesome where all participants are mutually interacting. There are some cuckold scenes that might turn into a threesome. We found that in our research that there's a lot of variability in how these fantasies play out. But most commonly, it's somebody watching their partner have sex with somebody else, and they're not participating in that sex act.
And the origin for this word, apparently, according to the internet, is the cuckoo bird who... Like, I think it was something to the effect of it lays its eggs in another bird's nest. So it like tricks the other bird into raising its kids.
Wow.
I'm like, this is a fucking smart ass bird. Like, that's what I'm talking about. You get to have all the fun of the sex and then like lay your eggs somewhere else and be like, bye.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's worth noting that the term cuckold used to be a very pejorative term where it was an insult to call a man a cuckold because it meant that he was partnered with a woman who was pregnant by another man. And so he would end up raising a child that wasn't biologically his. So you'll also see that term used in the literature sometimes to this day where, cuckold is this guy who is raising a child that's not biologically his. And it's usually applied in this heterosexual context. But, we see the term being reclaimed and used in a different way today where it's, more of a sexual thrill where people are getting off on this idea of their partner having sex with somebody else.
I think we made an assumption in this video that like people were going to be at least familiar with the term, which it did not end up being true. But I think it would have benefited from maybe like an intro slide at the beginning with like a definition for people to set it up. Okay, so some questions. LeoRising, this one's for you. And watching this video, of the three roles, of the the three guys that we saw, which would be most appealing to you personally? So would you rather be like the watching partner, the partner that's having sex, or the third person that's invited in?
Thank you for asking the question, Davey. So I'm just going to reiterate. Which role would I personally be more comfortable in that setup, in a cuckold setup?
Yeah.
Comfortable is interesting of a choice.
Or which would be most appealing to you? Like, which looks the most fun?
Being the cuck always seems like fun, right? But I think I would probably be the introducee, the person that it's brought in. That's been the story of my personal thirst, like that's occurred, or the propositions have occurred. And I've enjoyed that, but at this stage in my life, I think it depends. I'm so fluid. It really depends on like where I am in the relationship. I am comfortable being brought in.
Yeah. They all kind of look fun. I think. Well, Finn, let me ask you this: in watching this, would you say that you're more or less interested in a cuck experience? I mean, you wrote this concept, so like, is this? I don't know. Like, can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it's a lot of what I write is from my own fantasy mind, So I relate to both roles, not the one being brought in, but the one who is watching or the one who's getting fucked. Either one. It's interesting. I think that most of the listeners know that I used to have a wife, but I had a phase where I was, with women still, and I had a friend who's a dominatrix, and she asked me to play this role, at this time where she had a client that wanted this experience and wanted me to come in and fuck this guy, fuck her in front of the guy. And I just felt so like I cannot. I mean, granted, as a woman, and I was doing a lot of maneuvering with my identity at that time to really, but it didn't land. I just thought like I could not do that. I could not be that role. I could never be the one that comes in and does this in front of another person. It just felt like too much putting on. But I can absolutely get into like watching my boyfriend get fucked or vice versa.
And is that like more appealing? Like, for me, I think the thing that I struggle with is like, why not just have a threesome? Like, there's 3 people, like there's sex happening. It feels very Catholic to me.
Different.
It's like I'm gonna give this up. I'm gonna like I don't know. Like, why not be a part of it?
But there's
that's different. I mean,
yeah. There's a reward to psychologically or spiritually giving up something. There's something that is cathartic, and then there's something that is alleviating, like taking that responsibility off and being able to witness people that we care about enjoy life, right? Another reason is I have been propositioned by someone who, as details went on, because I ask a lot of questions, because I'm normally not as horny as the people who flirt with me. So I ask too many damn questions, then I kill the boner. Dr. Justin, like I fucking kill the boner. Because I'm like, what about sometimes people, Davey, they're having erectile dysfunction, like something may be anatomically off. And so a way for them to still feel connected is to, in essence, observe and see their partner happy. So there's a lot of reasons. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for the viewership and the witnessing of this kink, because relationships are really complicated when we put barriers up. Yeah, and so out of all the kinks that existed in the world, this is the one I'm like, I get it. There's a lot of healing that can occur for people, and it's also just fun.
It alleviates like the performance anxiety. Like, I'm just going to take a step back. Like, I don't have any pressure on myself and watch.
It can. I wouldn't speak in absolutes, because it's also it's very confronting.
And it's different for so many people, David. Like everyone has their own. Like for me personally, it is about the watching or the being watched, because it's kind of a little different. Like with my partner, like I feel anxious about not being able to be everything for him. It's like something that really comes up for me. So it's like a way to get close to the heat. That's like hard and painful, really, at one level. But I can be like, oh, this is exciting, and really see it. And it is exciting because it's like truth. Like I really want to be in that. And then on the other side of things, it's like kind of legitimizes for me, like my own desires too, to watch, and I've heard that from other guys that I work with too. It's either like I want to be close to what's scary, or it's like it legitimizes my desires. If I watch him, I can be like, yeah, I can too. It kind of lets the person feel permission. Those are some themes I hear.
So
go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a social psychologist and somebody who's studied this fantasy, I would say that different people seem to be drawn to it for very different reasons. And so there's not just, one thing you can boil it down to and say, this is why people are into cuckolding. But for some people, it's really more based in a voyeuristic interest. They just like to watch in general. And this is sort of like customized porn for you, with your ideal choice of performers, and you're like watching it happen live in front of you. And so that's very erotically appealing to some people. But cuckolding is also a vehicle to express BDSM desires oftentimes. And, in this video that you're talking about, there was a blindfold element to it. But in some cuckolding videos that you might see, or in actual practice of cuckolding, there might be more BDSM, where, for example, the partner who's watching gets humiliated by their partner in the process, right? Because they're having sex with somebody else, and they'll talk about how this third person, how their penis is much bigger than their partner's penis or something. So sometimes there's a small penis humiliation element that turns people on, or a bondage element where they might be wearing a chastity cage while they're watching their partner have sex with somebody else. And then, another part of it is that some people just really get off on their own partner's pleasure. Like they really like to watch their partner being pleased, and they take joy and pleasure. Like we call this concept compersion, where you get pleasure from your partner's pleasure. So that's another thing that draws some people to it. And then there's also, and I've seen this more for straight guys, but I think it can also happen for gay guys, where there's sort of some status or ego boost that comes from other people knowing that your partner is attractive and that your partner is going to go home with you at the end of this, right? So there's also that element that can be at play sometimes as well.
What did your research focus on when you were studying this?
So I've studied this a couple of different ways. So for my book, I asked people if they've ever fantasized about cuckolding, and I found that more than half of men across sexual orientations had fantasized about it, but even more gay and bisexual identified men had fantasized about it than heterosexual men. Women, it was somewhat less common, but many of them had certainly still fantasized about it, and it was more common for sexual minority women than it was for heterosexual women. And then in the study we did with Dan, we surveyed about 600 gay and bisexual men about their cuckolding fantasies. And so to participate in that study, you had to have fantasized about cuckolding before. And we asked people to describe those fantasies, and then also, if they've acted on them, what their experiences were like.
It kind of makes sense to me that it would be more popular among like gay men, for example, for the same reason that like threesomes are great if you're bi or if you're gay, because like you have the opportunity to be into like everything that's happening there. And so with a cuckold experience, like you can be turned on, of course, by your partner, but also by the person that's having sex with your partner. It's like doubly appealing. So that makes sense. That checks out for me.
Yeah, there's definitely a novelty element that's present. But just as a side note, the reason I did the study with Dan and David was because Dan didn't really think cuckolding was a thing for gay men. And he thought that it was something that was more unique to heterosexual men. And once Dan said this publicly, he started getting all these letters from gay men who are like, I'm into cuckolding. And so Dan was like, well, how common is this? What's going on here? And Dan actually thought that it might be related to the fact that same-sex marriage was becoming legal throughout the United States and other parts of the world, and that maybe this was a way of kind of like transgressing the norm of monogamy that comes with marriage. So they're sort of subverting that traditional concept of marriage. We didn't really find support for that idea in the work that we were doing, but we did find this is a common interest among gay men.
Yeah. In the conversation that happens at the beginning of this video with like Caden, JP, and Bishop when they're chatting on the front porch, are there things that you guys would have wanted to see like done differently, or things that you would have liked to see like addressed that maybe weren't? Kind of open question.
I would just say that I appreciate that conversation being there, right? Because most people don't have a model for how this works, right? And so that can give like a little bit of a template for people about, maybe how do you navigate this scenario? So I think that's useful to kind of, create a model for how this could potentially work for people.
Yeah. Yeah. Caden is such a good, I just love hearing him speak. Like he's such a gentle, generous soul. So he's asking them, like what are your hangups? Like he seems like the kind of person that you would want to invite like into an experience like this. But I would have loved to hear like JP maybe talk a little bit about like why this is hot for him to see Bishop getting fucked by another guy, but like not taking part in it himself. Like I would have loved to hear a little bit, more of the psychology, I guess, behind it. I don't know. Finn and LeoRising, did you have any thoughts on the convo at the beginning, other than that it was cool that it was there?
Well, I wrote that on purpose because I think that guys need templates for that. That's why, and to normalize it, like, oh, you could have this like fun, like sitting outside talk that's a little awkward, and then you can go have sex, and that's a good thing to do. A lot of men struggle with those sorts of conversations. So I think in reference to like what you said about JP, like I don't know that it's his like actual fantasy, so you know it would have been like kind of reaching into the dark to try to come up with an idea maybe, but he's like, well, but I just think that yeah, like having conversations. I also love, by the way, like Bishop laughing so much in the scene. And just like that, keeping that friendly, like the conversation on the porch just kept going. It didn't turn into like, okay, now we're in sex mode and we're not like, it just, they seemed really comfortable with each other and connected in like a loop.
It's okay to laugh during sex. Like, I think that's something that should be normalized. Like, you can have fun with it. It doesn't have to be all serious all the time.
Yeah.
But just one thing I would add to that would be, you know, if you were in real life gonna engage in cuckolding with your partner, you might have a more extended discussion than what you would see in this video, right? Because it wouldn't just be 4 minutes and then jump into bed. Like, you'd want to take a little bit more time to establish, you know, what are the rules and boundaries, what's acceptable here, what's going to come afterwards. Like, so, you know, yes, it's a nice like model template for maybe how you get started, but there's a lot that you want to build on if you're going to do this in real life.
Yeah,
100%.
And there would be like a first conversation that would be like you and your partner, like talking about like, okay, what are your boundaries? What do you want to do? And then there would be part 2, which is bringing Kate in, you know, but then suddenly we're in like a 2-hour you know, video that we're watching.
You're a feature length film at that point.
I'm into it.
You're an hour and a half in and there's no nudity. Finn would be like eating popcorn.
I'm into it. I love it. I want to say that I wanted the conversation to be more extensive, but it was just like for filming purposes, it needed to be a little bit more like cut, but
yeah, anything with dialogue, it just really eats up like filming time. Like the did you write those lines, Finn, or was that actually them saying those things?
No, I just gave them bullet points to cover and then let them kind of, I wanted them to sound more natural and not like they're like making lines, you know. So that was from their own improv.
Okay. Yeah, it did sound very natural, I thought. Cool. So I have some comments from viewers. Unless anyone has anything else to add before we dive into that.
I'll say it.
Say it.
I know. Cool. This time last year, or closer to the summer last year, one of my auditing notes was about introducing interracial relationships in threesome setups between cis white males that are gay, bisexual. The trope is the trope and the conditioning, the visual conditioning tends to lend itself to, here's a colored person, let's bring them into a relationship, it's hot. I would have liked to not seen anything different from this scene, because the conversation was more important. I don't know if the whole audience would have been able to digest a higher octave of the conversation being inclusive to Bishop being optically very black, and not being tokenized. But I felt like there were so many upticks in this scene that I politely forgot. Like, it wasn't something that I was like, oh, I'm going to rail them for this. And it is important to not, if you are a cis white male, gay, bisexual, whatever you identify as, not to yuck your yum, but really to do some deconstructing work as to why it's okay to introduce a temporary person of color as a partner versus having a person of color as a partner and introducing whatever it is that you guys like. It's still a sensitive toggle, or as we say in psychic space, like a niggle, like this inner feeling. It doesn't feel great. It feels great to be chosen. It doesn't feel great to walk away from that going, now these two white males are together and I was a guest. Like, it can sometimes feel weird for some people. And there have been times where I didn't care. And there's been times where I've been like, oh, I noticed that feeling. That was a very interesting unplugging. But there are other groups, like you said, Davey, where like it's like threesome mentality, and these things just don't come up. Like, you know, like two white males can totally have had a wonderful relationships with a person of color and just happen to fall in love and both miss whatever they missed about that. But we just want to watch the fetishization and watch the over tokening. But again, my overall takeaway, I was like, this video ran well. And I enjoyed the chemistry that was honest between the three men. So it's saved for me. It's definitely elevated. So yeah, happy Davey, I said it.
Yeah, that was, yeah, and that was a trope. That was a trope that we were aware of, which was why we didn't have Bishop be the guy that was brought in to kind of avoid like that conversation, which was kind of like the safer way to do it. But yeah, it was something that we considered. We also filmed this in
thank you.
2 years ago.
Finn, when did we do this?
2 years ago. In July, like 2 years ago, July.
Very good.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the race element, because that often is like a really big part of people's cuckold fantasies. But I find that that's especially true for heterosexual men, where, you know, the prototypical cuckolding fantasy for a straight guy is it's this white straight man watching his white girlfriend or wife have sex with a black man, right? And there's this great book that David Ley wrote called Insatiable Wives that really, you know, dives into the psychology of cuckolding fantasies, and he explores that racialized element and, you know, what it means and where it comes from. And so, you know, if you're looking for some further reading material on that for people who might be listening, like, I think that's a great resource. But something that was really interesting when we did our study of gay men who are into cuckolding was that interracial element wasn't really present. Like, it only emerged in about 1% of the cuckolding fantasies that people described. And so the interracial part is much more common among heterosexual men who are into cuckolding for some reason. And you know, I think we could have a whole podcast just on that element. But it was just something interesting I saw that popped out in my research.
Thank you for sharing.
Do we believe? Yeah. Do we believe that? Like, or maybe they're just like less willing to talk about it?
I would go with the latter.
It could be, you know, and maybe they didn't mention that, but something I did notice was that it was much more common for people to mention wanting to watch their partner be with somebody where there was a large age difference between their partners than it was for people to want to watch their partner with somebody of a different race. So, you know, for example, you know, we saw a lot of fantasies where it's, you know, one guy who wants to watch his partner have sex with somebody who's a lot older than him or something along those lines. So, you know, there are some fetishization elements that are certainly present in gay men's cuckolding fantasies, but they didn't explicitly describe the race element very often.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Should we dive into some comments?
I could spend like a whole day on like trying to theorize about that one too. Yeah. But yeah, let's dive into your comments.
Okay. And a very mixed bag of comments. So Brock B says, I loved it. This one hit all the high notes for me personally. So thank you. More importantly, it had some really good modeling of how to navigate adding a partner. First, I like how they considered how to change, how it could change their friendship. My experience witnessing friends opening up their relationships is that not a lot of negotiating occurs between partners, let alone how inviting a friend could alter their friendship. I can see on the surface how it would appear safe as it's someone you know, but it is also a great way to literally fuck up a friendship. I also like how Caden wore a condom during the scene. For me, it would be an important distinction between sex with my partner, which I prefer to be condomless. But if I were to partner with a third, I would prefer to be with condoms. For me, it's an intimacy thing. Great concept, Finn, and excellent delivery, Davey and team. I definitely think you should consider it for the best of category. Looking forward to your discussion on Friday. Quiet One says, these 3 models were perfect for the scene with their existing chemistry and connection as friends. The negotiation was a great aspect to include. And I appreciate that a lot of this wasn't done from a humiliation perspective, as a lot of them are. Yeah, we didn't take it there. Bill STR says, why was one person excluded? It would have been much less manipulative if he was welcomed into the experience. He was just there as an observer, not a participant. Please stop trying to prove something that is just not there. These episodes are not loving and prove to be more disturbing than anything. I call bullshit.
It's disturbed.
This was not.
Wow.
This was not. Yeah,
I'm not donating any free sessions to that guy. He has to pay for the session. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, I think Bill could have benefited from having a definition of cuckolding and being, because like this is kind of the point of what we're showing. Like,
I was gonna say it brings up a lot for him.
yeah, he did have a strong reaction. So,
Mm.
and then Gift Wrap says, "Great video, one of Himeros' best, an excellent portrayal of compersion. 5 out of 5. Whether 5 eggplant emojis or 5 stars." All right. Any other thoughts on the video or any of these comments? Because we have some questions from the audience for us to answer that are actually cuckolding related.
Cool.
Questions?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We're selling tickets for the Himeros experience. You can go to himeros.tv, click on the events tab. So it's in October. And we will be adhering to CDC guidelines for the 5-day retreat, which is in upstate New York. We don't know what those guidelines will be yet. It's going to be dependent on kind of what the environment is. And we'll make those decisions in a couple months. But we have about half of our tickets sold. We're still doing the early bird special, so you can get $100 off. Go to himeros.tv for that. Also, there's a new YouTube video out as of yesterday where I auditioned 3 straight strippers to be my gay boyfriend. It's a shit show, but pretty entertaining, so check that out. All right, let's answer these questions. If you guys have any questions or comments, send them to Davey at daveywavy.tv or call 612-470-5729. And for these questions, I tried to find ones that, some of these are old, but I think 2 of them are new and came in after this video. So question number 1, listening to Himeros Live has been a lifesaver for me. It has given me new energy to play with my sexuality. And even at age 67, I'm still learning new things about myself and especially my desires. In recent months, I've really started to explore some kinkier desires, things like fisting, taking huge dildos, electrocution, and BDSM. The problem is I'm in a very long-term marriage with a very wonderful but wholly vanilla 72-year-old man. His idea of kinky is letting me come on his chest in the rare instances where we actually have sex. I truly hate the idea of keeping secrets from him, but if he looked at my browser history, he would have a heart attack and die. So here I am, I'm 67, I'm kinky, and I'm in a vanilla relationship. Do I tell my husband? How do I tell him? Do I keep it to myself? Thank you for listening. So, what do we think when you're in a long-term relationship and you find that over time, maybe your desires kind of change and you find yourself getting more and more kinky, and I
would say that's not unusual for something like that to happen. And, I actually wrote an article about this recently where I talked about how when you're going into a relationship, sexual compatibility isn't something that you just establish when you first meet someone and then just like forget about it. And you're like, we're compatible for the rest of our lives, right? Mm-hmm. Because people evolve and change. Your body evolves and changes. What is pleasurable evolves and changes. And so it's really important to have repeated check-ins with your partner over time about your sex life and what you want from sex, because that varies. And if you haven't been having all those conversations all along, it really sets the bar a lot higher and makes it a lot harder to start those conversations, especially later in life. So, I don't envy this person being in this position because they've been in a very long-term relationship, and it's hard to introduce those kinds of desires that their partner may have never even contemplated before. And so I would recommend, going slow, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to, I'd say start first by just kind of having a check-in about your sex life, talking about where you are, and, maybe start sharing some fantasies, but start at the more vanilla end of the spectrum and work your way up, gauge your partner's comfort level, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, you feel for this person, like this idea of like sneaking off and like jerking off to these like, quote unquote kinkier videos, and feeling like, oh, I need to keep this a secret from my partner because if they know, there's no way they're going to want to continue this relationship. It's also an assumption, like that may not be the case. I don't know. Finn, what are you?
Well, I was going to say too, like I wasn't clear on the specific aspect of the question. It's like, what do I do? Do you want your partner to know? I mean, is that something you really want him to know? And if so, then yeah, going slow is great. But like, I think it's helpful to think of it like not as outcome, but like as a process. So not like a, what do I do to get to this point? But like, let me just start with, here's what, like this, like what's been coming up for me, or because it might just be an exploration too. Like we talked about earlier, he may not want to do some of the things, but just it's enjoyable to watch. And that, he could, enjoy all kinds of different possibilities with the partner knowing some or all of it. So I don't know if you want him to know, then yeah, there's a pathway, but I didn't get that from the question.
Well, he said, I hate the idea of keeping secrets from him. But if he looked at my browser history, he would have a heart attack and die.
And that's, so, I don't know if it's a secret. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. It could be privacy. What were you going to say?
I would say it's okay to have some fantasies that are just for you. Mm-hmm. You don't have to share every fantasy that you have. And just because your fantasy might not be something that's common and widely shared in the population, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. And it's okay to just keep that and enjoy it for yourself. The question is really, is this a desire? Like, why do you want your partner to know? And if it's that you want them to participate in this with you, then, that's a discussion you need to have. But is it also a conversation about he wants to open his relationship and be able to explore this with other partners because he knows that his primary partner isn't going to be into it? So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. I have a whole story in my head that's unraveling of this person, which is like, he wants to start going to like kinky, like sex party meetups. And like, he wants to really get involved in the BDSM community. And like, and that's like a motivation for him to be like, okay, I need to this is going to be a big part of my life. So, like I can't keep this whole aspect of who I am, this whole facet of my identity private from my partner, but that's not written in this question, so that's my projection.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Question number 2. Anything else? Okay. I'm writing to you and Finn after watching this week's cuckold video because I have an ethical dilemma. It's no LeoRising. My boyfriend and I have an agreement that if we have sex with other people, we still involve each other. He travels for business, so that means we have virtual threesomes. I join in over FaceTime, and even though I'm not in the room or in on the action, I tell the guys what to do and basically act as a remote dom. The dilemma is, I think it would be super hot to secretly watch my partner have sex with someone else. Obviously, my partner would know. He'd have to set up his phone somewhere, but his hookup partner would not know. I would absolutely never record or screenshot anything, and the hookup guy would never know. It's also hotter that he doesn't know. The obvious answer is just tell the guy, but there's something so much more appealing about watching an authentic experience rather than something that feels like a performance. It's also so much more taboo and therefore hotter. Is it wrong if I watch without telling the third? Am I accumulating bad karma?
I love that they didn't ask me this question.
Well, my thoughts are that it's like, this is a great example in my mind of desire versus arousal, because I can relate to the or like the fantasy versus the desire, like I can relate to the hotness of that. Like that's something I can relate to, but it's like to do it is like, violating this guy's consent and, exploiting the situation. So I can't say, oh yeah, go for that. But I can see like the excitement in it too. So it, that's just a tension to sit with in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, something else I'm thinking of is that, when you have a sexual fantasy and you want to play it out in reality, there are all kinds of ways you can adapt it. It doesn't have to follow the exact script that you have in your head. And so maybe it's that, you tell your partner, like, this is my fantasy, and you have the conversation with them off screen, like beforehand, figure it out, get their consent, for me to be able to watch. And so then they can set it up so that it feels like this kind of like natural experience, right? Where they're just kind of like the fly on the wall that they want to be. So in that way, you don't have to violate any ethical boundaries or consent boundaries, but you can still sort of live out that fantasy. So sometimes when you have a fantasy that has a, non-consensual or dangerous element, it's about how do we work that fantasy in a way that is acceptable in real life.
Yeah. I mean, this guy, like, if you're going to a hotel room, like, there's a reasonable expectation of privacy. So, like anyone that's having sex in that space is not consenting to being watched. And like him not knowing that his consent is violated doesn't justify it being violated. So yeah, I mean, like you could break into someone's house, sniff their dirty underwear, and they wouldn't know, but it's still illegal and and wrong. So for me, it kind of falls into that category. I don't know.
I mean, I can see the eroticism in it, but for me, my own personal journey, I feel like that's a great place to start digging to uncover more about why that's so exciting to you. Because I would imagine that that comes up in other ways in your life as well.
LeoRising, even though this question wasn't directed towards you, do you have any thoughts?
This is why the legalization of sacred intimates is so important. There are some wonderful role players that do this professionally and consensually, and they're such great actors and performers that this fantasy can be fulfilled in a holistic way that doesn't jeopardize anyone's karma, because you pay someone to make you believe that you're not really there and that they don't know you're not really there. Everything, because it's like in the world of sex trafficking, like to have that as a fantasy, it's like, okay, I get it, but it's also like, are you serious? The investigation work though it's gonna be so revealing and expansive to understand like the genesis of where that comes from, and that there won't be a shame point. It'll be like, oh fuck, wow, like I'm very creative, but to want to execute it is concerning. I would implore them, when they're ready to execute it, to hire a sacred intimate as a professional.
Cool. All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour. So next week we are going to be discussing Smoking Gun. We were going to discuss it this week. We switched up the orders. We keep putting off this video. Yeah, next week's video is intense. Whew, we're going to have a lot to say. So yeah, God help us all. Finn, where can people get more of you?
FinnDearHeart.com.
Awesome. LeoRising, where can people get more of you?
I'll try to be on the podcast more and not give anybody else anxiety. I wish I remembered her name, that beautiful lady. But just Instagram. Just find me on the gram. That's where I like it.
And Dr. Justin, where can people find you?
My website is sexandpsychology.com. You can find my blog and podcast there. And you can also connect with me on the social medias. I'm on Twitter at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller.
Awesome. And remember, you can join Himeros.tv and save 20% at Himeros.tv/pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Dr. Justin. And as always, more to come.